Consider this an invitation to my gangster nation. West
Okay, so when it comes to campaign tactics, we're going to talk briefly about political ads and presidential debates. So political advertising is the primary means that political candidates use to communicate and develop message for voters. Millions of dollars are spent on political ads in the election cycle, including ads made by special interest groups. The ads are usually 30 or 60 seconds, and there's a growing trend to introduce the ads over the internet. Many of these ads are treated as news by media. Political ads are classified as negative attack ads, biographical in nature, emotional ads that use endorsement as the theme, humorous, issue-oriented, ads that tout a candidate's record, ads that respond to the candidate's opponent. Even though people claim to dislike negative ads, studies have found that negative ads are, in fact, the most effective. And just some political ads of the past that actually made a difference. In 1964, there was what's known as the Daisy ad, and this was the campaign of President Lyndon Johnson. This ad had a little girl picking a daisy as a voice is counting down, and then a big nuclear explosion is seen. And the ad made Barry Goldwater seem reckless, and it was just aired once during the campaign season. In 1984, Morning in America was Ronald Reagan's optimistic vision of America, and it was uplifting and inspiring. In 1984, there was the Bear in the Woods ad, and an allegorical ad that helped frame President Reagan's race against Walter Mondale, portraying a bear roaming in the woods, designed to remind people of the Soviet threat. Willie Horton Weekend Pass. 1988, Willie Horton was a convicted felon who received a weekend pass from Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis and raped a woman. The ad had racial overtones. And the Swift Boat Veterans of 2004. A 527 independent ad run by Vietnam vets raising questions about John Kerry's Vietnam service. Many experts point to this ad as the turning point of the 2004 campaign. The second tactic we're going to focus on are presidential debates. And presidential debates were first televised beginning in 1960 when Richard Nixon debated John F. Kennedy and became an integral part of the campaign. Debates were later expanded to include vice presidential candidates. Incumbents refused to debate in 1964, 1968, and 1972. Debates are run by the Commission on Presidential Debates. They set up the rules and the sites for the debates. They were criticized by third-party candidates who were excluded from the debates in 1996, 2000, and 2004. Debates have a significant impact on the campaign. Supporters of the candidates, called spin doctors, try to convince the media that their candidate won the debate. And just some examples of presidential debates that made a difference in elections. In 1960, the Kennedy-Nixon debate. This was the first televised debate, like I said, and people who watched the first debate felt Kennedy looked presidential, meaning he was hot. The Carter-Ford debate in 1976, Ford made a mistake when he said that, quote, "there is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe," end quote. The press played this up as a major blunder. The Reagan-Carter debate of 1980, Reagan's questions to the viewers, quote, "are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" summarized what was wrong with the Carter administration. Reagan went on to defeat the incumbent president. And so Ford and Carter are actually part of only 3 presidents in the 20th century who did not win their bid for re-election, and 2 of them, and a third in just a second. Obviously, like the televised debates were a flub for them. The Clinton-George H.W. Bush Ross Perot debate in 1992. Ross Perot became a viable candidate, and the town hall format was established. So a couple things there. Ross Perot stole 20% of the popular votes. He is arguably the most successful independent or third-party candidate in a presidential election. And then the town hall format was established where the candidates actually field and answer questions from the audience. And then lastly, in 2012, the Romney-Obama debate, even though he lost, Romney changed the dynamic of the campaign as a result of a poor debate performance by the incumbent president. And so those were just a couple of highlights in modern televised debates. Okay, so in terms of the next step in the timeline, really as soon as the debates wrap up, it's really time to vote. And the 26th Amendment, which was ratified most recently, then the other, I just said that way wrong. The 26th Amendment, when it was ratified, gave the right to vote to citizens of 18 years or older in both federal and state elections. The amendment was necessary because the Supreme Court struck down laws in states that gave 18-year-olds the right to vote in state elections. After the amendment was passed, the youth vote registration increased, but since 1972, the percentage of voters 18 to 24 voting in congressional and midterm elections has been consistently lower than other age groups. So who votes? Let's look at patterns of who actually is turning out to vote. Education is something that is often pointed to, and this is because people with higher than average education levels have a higher rate of voting than people with less education. Age, young adults are less likely to follow politics regularly and hence often lack sufficient motivation to vote. And so, let's see, people in that 18 to 24 age group vote significantly less than people who are 65 years and older or any other breakdown of age. Race and ethnicity minorities are usually underrepresented among voters relative to their share of the citizenry. And for the first time ever, actually, there was a change in that. In 2008, there was no significant difference in the turnout rates between African Americans and white non-Hispanics due to the historic nature of the Obama candidacy. And in 2010, the turnout rate for African Americans was 6% below that of white non-Hispanics. Gender. Women participate at a slightly higher rate than men. Marital status. Married people are more likely than singletons to vote. And people who work for the government tend to have very high levels of participation, probably because they have a stake in the matter. And I think that that's where we are going to stop today. If you would like, I'm happy to share with you from 1960 all the way up to 2012 presidential campaign highlights. I just don't think I want to. We have a very low voter turnout compared to other democratic countries. Probably the one that's most often cited is the American requirement of voter registration. The governments of many, but not all other democracies take the responsibility of seeing to it that all their eligible citizens are on the voting list. In America, the responsibility for registration lies solely with the individual. If we were like Scandinavian countries, for example, where the government registers every eligible citizen, no doubt our voter turnout would be higher. And then another difference is that the American government asks citizens to vote far more often. Whereas the typical European voter may cast 2 or 3 ballots in a 4-year period, many Americans are faced with a dozen or more separate elections in the space of 4 years. And furthermore, Americans are expected to vote for a much wider range of political offices, with one elected official for roughly every 500 citizens, and elections held somewhere virtually every week. So really the novelty of it wears off, thus decreasing motivation. And the stimulus to vote is low in the U.S. because the choices offered to Americans are not as starkly different as in other countries. The U.S. is quite unusual in that it has always lacked a major left-wing socialist party. When European voters go to the polls, they are deciding on whether their country will be run by parties with socialist goals or by conservative, and in some cases, religious parties. The consequences of their vote for redistribution of income and the scope of government are far greater than what the ordinary American voter can imagine. And lastly, we are one of the few democracies that still vote midweek when most people are working. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution allows Congress to determine the timing of federal elections Thus, Congress could certainly change the date of Election Day if it wanted to, but I'm sure they would not want to have to be responsible on weekends. And comparative research actually does show that countries that hold elections on weekends actually have a higher voter turnout. So maybe Congress could give up a Saturday so that voters would have an opportunity to participate. Who knows? Just an idea for Miss Padgett.
Really rough. These girls out here about the bucks. These fools out here afraid to bust. I have no fear, afraid of what? And with my peers I'm coming up. Fools talk real loud but don't run up. When we come through they run and duck. We still right here, don't press your luck.